like to call this evening's meeting to order. Would you all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everyone this evening. We will have the minutes on the consent agenda. We will then have a public hearing for the Unified Development Code text amendment. The third item is a preliminary plat for Oaks at Woods Chapel. We will then hear a master alternative sign plan for Kings Ridge Shopping Center. Then we will also have a discussion on the 2008 Planning Commission annual report, any other business, and then hopefully all will be well and we will adjourn. The first item on the agenda is the consent agenda, which is the minutes from the June 8th meeting. Any additions or corrections to those?
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. The second item is our public hearing on the UDC text amendment. Because it is a public hearing, I'll open it, call for exhibits from the city attorney. We will then have staff comments. Since we have no other applicant, anyone wanting to speak in favor or in opposition will then be heard. We'll then close the public hearing and bring it back up to the commission. That being said, I will open the public hearing. Mr. McDonald?
Madam Chair, the city has 3 exhibits. Number 1 is the staff report with attachments. Number 2 is the affidavit of publication in the Blue Springs Examiner. Number 3 is the application with attachments. Those are all of the exhibits the city would offer into the record at this time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Mr. Hawley?
Thank you. In January of 2009, the mayor, after some discussion on some issues with a current tower proposal that was going through at that time, the mayor decided that a task force should set up, and Councilman Shaver was kind enough to lead that task force. And about 3 to 4 weeks ago, Councilman Shaver also provided this presentation to the City Council. It's excellent. It goes through all of the changes, so I thought we would just use it again. The committee members on the task force are named up there. Councilman Shaver was obviously the chairperson of this committee. We had Councilman Edmondson, Councilman Salon, Planning Commissioner Henning, Pam Abarillo, and Jim Wallace, Roberta Murder, Dina McLean, and Bill Reddy, as well as James Berry. They held 8 meetings. The dates are up there. I won't go over them. At those meetings, we had different people from the industry come in. Again, you can see Selective Site, T-Mobile, and Verizon Wireless. And we also had we also had a planner from Lee Summit come in and talk about their ordinance. And Commissioner Trozen kindly came in and spoke about Jackson County's ordinance. The ordinance review, one of the things that we did at the very beginning, or I should say the task force did at the very beginning, was to look at various ordinances, and they are listed up there. Obviously the local ordinances within the Kansas City metropolitan, but also looking at ordinances from outside of the state of Missouri, and some states are listed up there. Excuse me. This map portrays the existing towers that or antenna sites that are in the city. As you can see, there's towers are fairly spread out throughout the city. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later when we talk about some of the findings that we got from the industry as far as how many additional towers we would be needing in the future. Some of the key findings, and we'll just start right off with Selective Site Consultants. They were letting us know that they think that based on their projections right now, we're not likely to need more towers in Blue Springs, 2, possibly 3 new towers. They identified some areas. If I can go back, certainly the south side of Blue Springs may need an additional tower, and possibly over around Adams Dairy Parkway there may be a need. In those 2 areas were specifically identified. We also talked about heights of towers, and the average height of the tower is typically between 100 and 150 feet. We had T-Mobile come in, and of course they reiterated some of the things that Selective Site Consultants had told us, but also adding to that, noted that inside building coverage is certainly becoming more important than previous. Monopole towers can be stealthed by enclosing the antennas within the towers, and the example of the flag there, and we'll see another example later, but that would be typical. The antenna arrays are inside of that pole. Shorter towers typically reduce coverage and the opportunity for co-location. When you start putting those antenna arrays inside of that tower, you limit the number of arrays that can be on that tower. And so that's kind of what that pointed out. We had Verizon also, again, spoke about many of the same things, but one of the new things we got out of that really was that the technology growth may very well reduce the need for more towers. In other words, they're getting more efficient with what they're using. Things are getting smaller, and the need for towers may be reduced because of that. We certainly talked a lot about stealth design and probably the key pro issues. Certainly appearance, they look nicer. The unique designs that are available for stealth design, and some are shown there, and they also may be multi-use. If they're not an identification marker for your community, an art piece, or even possibly, of course, the multi-use of water towers as we've seen in Blue Springs numerous times. The cons, they often reduce the ability to co-locate, and that's, again, going back to what I spoke of earlier. When you use those enclosed types of facilities, you can get fewer facilities inside of them. And because you're reducing the co-locations, it may require more towers, and their designs are specific for locations. These are just some photographs, just to kind of go over some of what we saw and some of what I'm sure you guys will recognize as well. This is a typical monopole tower, no stealth design at all. This is one of the monopole towers where they've put the antenna arrays inside, and again, as you can see up to the right, there's the flag. It can be utilized that way, but it doesn't necessarily have to have the flag. There's some disadvantages to the flag, one being maintenance. You have to change that flag often. The other being because the pole is so high, you typically require a very large flag, and again, taking that up and down and providing the maintenance. So it doesn't have to have a flag, and there's a typical design of a monopole. This is what they call monocross, same concept. And here we hear so many times about using trees. This is an example actually of a tree that was used that I actually think is a good example because it really does blend in fairly well. Keep in mind that that's a fairly low tower right there, but it works well in its setting, fairly well in its setting. And then one of the things that came about was communities that use their their park facilities, and particularly ball field lights and also other utility type poles. We're starting to see a little bit of that, and so you'll see in the ordinance one of the things that we changed was there was a prohibition on using utility poles, and that's one of the changes that's recommended. But this is an example of putting the antenna arrays on ball field lights. So to begin with the ordinance changes, we'll go over them fairly quickly. We added to the purpose that telecommunication towers, to the extent possible, should accommodate emergency services. We added the green statement. What you will see here is that those things in green or highlighted in green are what is being changed, and to this particular section, we excluded elements that are part of a stealth design, and that gets back to, obviously, the flag. This originally had prohibited that. We looked at security fencing. Again, I won't read all of these. I will note in the next section, the second one, that one of the things that came up after the presentation had been made to the council and some additional information had come back from the police station in talking about the new communications systems that they will need, we had originally thought of prohibiting prohibiting lattice type or tower type structures, lattice tower type structures. And shortly or briefly, the end result of the discussions with the police department and their provider, which I think was Motorola, was that you might not want to do that because for our systems, those kinds of towers offer some stability and other things that allow them to be a better structure to put our facilities on. And so we added this particular sentence, the unless specifically provided for elsewhere in this section, and soon we'll see the elsewhere. Excuse me, the requirement to be waived by a governing body for landscaping came about when talking about whether or not how much landscaping do you really need, and a good example would be in Greg Grounds Park, where the tower and the equipment were being placed inside the park in a fairly remote area with a lot of trees, existing trees around it, and how much benefit do you really get from the additional landscaping. So on an individual case-by-case basis, there was a provision to allow them to look at those kinds of things. Terrain sometimes can make a difference as well. We deleted the prohibition of antennas being mounted on utility poles and light poles. We talked about that. In the next section, we changed from 25 feet and we reduced to 20 feet. The first section is again where we had originally added that lattice and guide towers would be prohibited. And then after the discussion with the police department for their facilities that they'll need for their communication systems, we put in this except that the lattice towers may be permitted by the city council if needed to provide required integral elements of the city's or other governmental agencies' emergency services communications network. So we added that afterwards as well, and those are the two changes that came about as a result of getting the information from the police and their providers, possible providers for communication systems. And finally, the photo simulation of facilities is a new requirement. Most of you know who've sat on the commission for a while, we usually do get photo simulations. This just codifies that we need those photo simulations, and it also talks about 4 points and gives us a little better ability to require those photo simulations. It also allows us to get those photo simulations up front with the application. It will allow us to better evaluate the applications. The engineering report, it was thought that that should be provided by a licensed professional engineer in the state of Missouri, so that's the change there. And again, the landscaping we already talked about once. Again, except when waived by the governing body, and that's to deal with issues where the tower really isn't going to be that visible, nor the equipment, and therefore the ability to waive the landscaping requirement ought to be there because the landscaping isn't going to really have any benefit anyway. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Also, thank you for attending tonight. Councilman Shaver is here. I'm sure he would be happy. And Councilman Solon is here, and I'm sure she would be happy. And Commissioner Henning is here.
Does anyone have any questions?
Madam Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Phillips.
I actually have 3 questions, two more specific and one more general. I'll start with the general one. As you said, this all came about from a cell tower over in Grounds Park. And at that point, there was a lot of discussion about the benefit of the stealth versus getting more providers on the pole. Was any decision made, is there anything in here that codifies which one of those takes priority? Are we looking for more per pole, or are we looking for more stealth?
It was, there was a lot of discussion about those two issues, but I will tell you that with the exception of the prohibition on lattice and guide poles, there wasn't a specific direction changed from our current ordinance, which requires a hierarchy, and one of the hierarchies that you look at first is a stealth design. So it will be evaluated the same as it's evaluated today. You first look at the stealth design and weigh those benefits, and then if you think that the benefit of a taller tower with more arrays on it is preferable, that's the next option down the hierarchy.
Okay. Well, and you brought up my second point here. When I first read this about the lattice and guide towers, my first impression from this was that we're setting a double standard here. We're allowing the city to do something we're not allowing anybody else to do. And we've done that on some other things in the past, and I get upset when I see that happen. Would you like to comment on that, or would somebody else like to?
I don't know that I have a comment to that. Does anybody else want to comment to that?
Jim? To answer your first question, what we discovered in the meetings, and Lyle, you can jump in here anytime if you so choose, is that the monopole, the stealth towers, in which everything is confined in the pole with nothing external, does not have near as much power for the amount of cell phones that are out there. And additionally, the amount of data that's being transferred amongst the airways nowadays. You really learn a lot when you sit on this kind of committee. So it kind of did veer away from the stealth design simply because we already have several regular looking towers as it is. And although there would be a benefit, the benefit of going stealth versus the increased number of stealth towers you would have to have versus the one or two more that we'll eventually need, we decided was not worth it. In addition, as the trend goes, so much more data is being conveyed, not only on your cell phone, but your computers wirelessly, and the stealth designs really hinder the transmission of that much data that is increasing month by month, year by year.
So was there talk of changing the hierarchy?
Hierarchy meaning?
Meaning what Mr. Hawley was talking about, where stealth is the first thing you look at and number of providers is the second thing you look at. Was there talk about reversing those?
We did not change the hierarchy in the code.
But what I'm hearing is that the hierarchy is becoming more, or the number of providers and the amount of data they can carry is becoming more important. So, should that have been swapped? And, get this maximum number of providers per pole and then disguise it as much as possible.
Well, in addition,
rather than going the other way around.
in addition to that, with the monopole design, you are able to put multiple antennas outside, which allows for less poles. If you go stealth, you're going to have a lot more of them out there because you cannot co-locate near as many.
Right.
And as a committee, we just kind of went back and forth and looked at the trade-offs and what we thought was best, and considering the fact that we will only need one or two more. And this is just our guesstimation. This is not coming from scientists or engineers. This is citizens that heard from experts that we may end up needing one or two more monopole towers. If you do stealth, it could be 4, 5, or 6 or more.
Well, and that goes right back to my whole thing about reversing the order on these things.
When you say reversing the order, you mean you think stealth should be primary?
No, I think stealth is primary right now. I think maybe stealth should not be the primary.
And we're not making it primary.
That's not what Mr. Hawley said.
We're making it monopole, which is, we're getting away from the lattice and the guide wire, but it's kind of like the happy median is how I understood it, is that the monopole design
is a single pole, but yet the antennas are external and you can still co-locate.
Right, but
But it doesn't have a stealth factor that way.
No,
Yeah.
and I think that's where the confusion's coming. Stealth and monopole are
Are not
two
the same-
separate items.
Not the same thing.
Correct. So, and the lattice would be for emergency services, but your stealth is secondary to the monopole,
But that's
is
not
what I
that's not what
understand.
Mr. Holly said.
This is a typical tower.
That's
It is a monopole tower.
No, I understand the difference between the two.
Right.
I'm saying that should be the primary design, not the stealth, which is not what you just said.
You're correct in that the hierarchy that is provided in the code did not change. So stealth is one of the options, and it is at the top of the hierarchy. And, you know, I would say that stealth remained important.
And I'm not saying it shouldn't be important, but I'm thinking it should be number 2 over maximizing the tower.
well, with the updated technology, like Jim was stating, we can continue with the hierarchy of stealth, number one, because the way the technology is going, it's
Well, I hope that's right,
well,
but,
I mean, that's what they're saying.
you know.
Okay, I'd like to have Mr. Schaefer come up, if you would, please. And would you give testimony on this, please?
Miles Shaver.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you'll give in this matter is the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I will. I will make, I guess, 2 comments.
We need your name and address.
Starting to say that.
It's-
Miles Shaver,
Please.
1325 Hilltop Drive.
Thank you.
6401. I think a couple of points I would make. One, I think in reviewing this, the more we learn, each location, the best solution is different.
Sure.
So I don't think it makes sense to codify any preference in terms of design, other than some general limits. For example, you were questioning stealth first. We have stealth on our water towers. That's a stealth design. That was first priority in the city, and I think that made sense. So, again, it depends on location. I think if there's an appropriate church tower somewhere that they want.
I just don't want us to get it caught up in the, well, if it isn't stealth, you know, we have to sacrifice everything else to get the stealth.
Excuse me?
We have to sacrifice the number of providers to get
Not
the stealth,
necessarily.
which
Not
was the
necessarily.
discussion we had in January, was sacrificing the number of providers to get a stealth pole,
That depends on the stealth design.
you know,
The water tower is an example. You don't sacrifice the numbers on that.
so.
You can have multiple antennas on a water tower. Again, I think the key is you gotta evaluate each one separately.
I agree with that 100%. Would you like to comment on the fact that we're allowing the city to do something we're not allowing other people to do?
Well, I think.
Because we've done that with the sign ordinance as well, which is, to me, completely wrong.
Okay. That is an issue that came up late after we had really put together the ordinance. And in my mind, what we're really saying is, as a last resort, we will allow emergency to use lattice design. Nothing says that's going to have to be the case. I guess in my mind, if I'm wearing my city council hat, they need to justify why a monopole will not work satisfactorily.
Are you referring, Ken, to the tower at Great Grounds Park?
No.
In regards to the double standard?
No, I'm not,
Okay.
not at all.
Okay.
No, this,
Okay.
I'm simply referring to the ordinance that says we cannot have these except for the city.
Okay.
And I don't like a law that says we cannot do it except for the city.
I agree.
To my knowledge, the reasoning for that is the technology is different on the emergency communications from what the cell towers are using. Alignment is key. That's the reason that they may need the lattice design, because they're using, somebody help me, it's more knowledgeable, I have microwave, I think, for communication, and alignment of the antennas is critical. And therefore, you don't want the torsional or the sway movement is more significant there than it is for telephone communication.
I just want us to be very careful when we're doing something like that.
So I would suggest it can be justified based on different technology, a different need, different requirement for the communication.
So it's the movement issue that's,
Yes, my understanding is it's a movement issue. Yes. And again, I think we, as city council, you as planning, they need to justify why it needs to be different.
Right.
well, and actually the first choice they're gonna be, police are gonna hit on is the water towers anyways, because it's usually the highest points of the.
Yes.
Mr. Allen?
Sure. If I may just add to that, what Councilman Shaver mentioned is that the way it was explained to us, again, kind of a last minute approach to Councilman Shaver and I think the committee members as well, is that that's exactly that. They just want that option left open. It's not necessarily going to dictate that they require lattice towers. It's possible they could utilize monopole towers, but they just want to have that ability. Should, again, exactly case-by-case issue, topography, just general location would not allow a monopole as a best use for that technology. And exactly as Councilman Shaver said, it's a different technology from what the cell phone providers are using.
Again, I just want us to be very cautious when we're using that kind of language. My last question has to do with the photo simulations, and I totally agree that we need the photo simulations. But when I saw, the first thing I said when I read this was, we could be requiring, 50 different photo simulations. It really doesn't, because it says any property, within a mile here. So we could be requiring all kinds, every single homeowner, could want their own photo simulation of what that tower's gonna look like from their backyard. That's very onerous on the cell tower provider.
It says from 4 points.
No, it goes on further to say from any neighborhood residential property.
Not every.
But
If it needs to be defined, it should be defined, but it was absolutely not
I-
our intent to
it
supply
does
every-
need to be clarified in my mind, so that, any neighboring residential property could mean an awful lot of photo simulations.
No, see, I don't read it that way.
That was not the intent,
No,
nor.
this simply says that you have from 4 points, and those 4 points should be taken from some residential property.
That's not
It
what-
doesn't
that's-
say one per property.
That's not the way I read it at all, because the 4 points is a minimum. The minimum provided.
One comment I
No.
would make, one of the gentlemen, Mr. Berry, who was on our committee, works for a company who does some type of environmental work. I can't remember the name.
Telecommunications.
He was the one that suggested this. He says that's our standard practice. Anyway, so it's not creating any problem.
I think once you get to 8, 10, 12 different points, you've probably given everybody a vantage point. You don't need to go any further than that. So I'd like to see some kind of a maximum on that, maybe, so that you're not getting every single house that's not necessarily in a neighborhood or something like that.
We can absolutely provide that recommendation to the city council. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions?
Thank you.
Susan, I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Trozen.
When I read the language right above where we had the discussion with the exception,
Mhm.
this wouldn't preclude, for example, if a private provider came in and wanted to incorporate the police telecommunication or network first, and then provide antennas on the lattice second, would it?
I might let our city attorney address that, but we did look
Yes,
at
it
that
would.
issue.
Huh?
It has to be the city or a governmental agency.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Anyone have any other questions for staff then? Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak either in favor or in opposition to this? Seeing none, I'll bring it back up here on the record for any further discussion. Seeing none, close public hearing. I would entertain a motion.
I would like to make a motion to approve Unified Development Code Text Amendment UDCT 6-09-2197.
Second that.
I have a motion and a second by Mr. Franklin. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Billups?
Aye.
May?
Aye.
Franklin?
Aye.
Haney?
Aye.
Parker?
Aye.
Henning?
Aye.
Banks?
Aye.
Trozen?
Aye.
Culpepper?
Aye. All right, that has, we'll go forward to council with recommend of approval. I want to thank everybody who worked on that committee. I'm sure you're all full of lots and lots of information now about cell phones. All
I
right.
have no idea.
That brings us up to the next item, which is the preliminary plat, Oaks at Woods Chapel. Mr. Hawley.
Thank you. Before you tonight is a preliminary plat for the Oaks at Woods Chapel. The plat addresses 24.71 acres and is located on the west side of Woods Chapel Road between Carlfelt Drive, which is to the north, and Northeast Valley View Road, which is to the south of the plat. Many of you probably recognize this particular parcel. The property was rezoned in 2004, and a PUD was approved at a similar time frame. That PUD expired in 2006. In 2008, the Planning Commission recommended and the City Council approved a rezoning for the northern portion, and that northern portion is not highlighted in gray. It is to the obviously to the north and a bit to the west of the area highlighted in gray, labeled GB. That was rezoned from MF14 to GB, and then the entire site was rezoned from PUD just to straight zoning with the GB. The Planning Commission approved a for sale preliminary plat, and the City Council approved a final plat, which was a for sale plat. That occurred in May of 2008. In May of 2009, now coming to the more recent times, the City Council approved a PUD concept plan entitled the Oaks at Woods Chapel, and I'm sure many of you remember reviewing that as well and providing a recommendation for that PUD concept plan. The developer continues to move forward with this preliminary plat towards recognizing the first phase. All of the lots do meet the minimum size requirements as far as lot width and lot area for the GB zoning district. Sidewalks were not shown on the preliminary plat, but they will be required, and sidewalks will be required along Northwest Woods Chapel Road as well as along Valley View Road. That's reflected in a condition of approval. Access was an issue that was discussed quite a bit during the conceptual plan. The PUD plan shows two primary accesses, one of them off of Northwest Valley View Road. And then one off of Northwest Woods Chapel Road. And that primary access off of Northwest Woods Chapel Road will be somewhere in this area, and it has yet to be defined. That's all being worked out as part of the tax increment finance agreement as they continue to move forward with that. There are also 2 secondary access points along Woods Chapel Road. Those access points are noted this location and this location. The final plat should show landscape buffer easements and does not, and of course we haven't gotten the final plat yet, but that will also be a condition of approval to show those landscape easements. There are some existing sanitary sewer easements. I don't know how well they show up. I'm sorry, I said sanitary sewer. This looks like a stormwater easement, and that stormwater easement will be relocated from the north highlighted area to the south highlighted area. The staff hasn't received a full traffic study for the proposed project at this point, and the applicant will be required to submit the traffic report prior to the PUD final plat. Having said that, I need you to understand that a traffic report for Woods Chapel Road I believe has been done, and our Public Works Director, Oliver, is here, can tell you more, but Trans System has been dealing with that traffic report. Whether it's in final form, I'm not sure, but it is certainly being done and has been discussed with the city for many times. The developer will be required to provide some of the street improvements, certainly along Valley View Road. They're required to provide street improvements. And you also received, well, we'll get into that in a minute. They also will be responsible for their internal road systems. But as you know, the city's project for Woods Chapel Road will deal with many of the improvements along Woods Chapel Road. And so they are simply required to provide the right-of-way that is needed for those improvements to occur. The applicant also will need to submit a stormwater management plan and has not done that yet. That will come as well prior to the final plat approval. I think a memorandum was handed to all the commissioners tonight, and in that memorandum there were originally 12 conditions being proposed as part of the TIF agreement. One of the things that is very important as far as that north access goes is that we make sure that we have the appropriate right-of-way dedicated to the city, so that as we move forward with that project, we know that we have all of the right-of-way that we will need in place. So the condition, as is described in the condition that we're asking you to also attach to this preliminary plat approval, is that the applicant dedicate street right-of-way as shown in Exhibit K3, and Exhibit K3 again is on the overhead in the tax increment financing contract, which was approved by the City Council in May of 2009. The right-of-way shall be dedicated prior to the City Council approval of final plats, meaning that we know that their intent right now my bearings, which is always a challenge. We know that they are trying to move forward with that lower area, or the southern area. Certainly the corner of Woods Chapel Road and Valley View Road is a high priority for them, because they have a prospective tenant and builder that's interested in that site. However, before they move forward with that, we need for them to dedicate, before they move forward with the final plat for that, we need them to dedicate that area to the north, so that we have all of those rights-of-ways in place. They'll do that by a separate dedication document. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Anyone have any questions? Mr. Billups?
I didn't have any questions until I got the addendum today. This condition 13 that you're requesting here, is that setting an exact location for that right-of-way?
We're asking them to dedicate that exact right-of-way, and yes, there is an exact location on their property. There's a portion of it that isn't theirs yet. We're not asking them to dedicate that. But what is on their property, we want them to dedicate.
Well, why are we asking them to dedicate a right-of-way that would require removing an existing business that they don't own?
It's primarily because one of the alternate configurations looks at that as part of the TIF plan.
I have a real problem with us saying, okay, your business is here, but we're gonna drive right through it in some future date. That, to me, is just sending the wrong message to the business community. When it could be easily rerouted around an existing building or existing business.
What I will
So
say
I
to
have
that
a
is
real problem with that
easily might
recommendation.
Mr.
not be
DeGray,
the
would you
exact
like
word.
to join us up here?
I think I can speak from here.
Okay.
Let me allay your fears. We are in discussions with property owners and two other governmental entities relative to the alignment or the improvements on Woods Chapel Road. As such, we're not at liberty to talk about the state of those negotiations. But I can assure you that we're not doing this in a willy-nilly or piecemeal fashion. And that business owner that you're referring to has been contacted, and we are in discussions with them. So I don't think I can say anything more about that, but we're considering everyone along the corridor and the impact that it will have on their property.
Well, there are just so many empty land and empty buildings that to have one that's actually providing revenue and have that the place we're going to draw the road just seems really wrong.
Commissioner, I believe when you see if we're able to build what we would like to build, I think it will make very clear sense to you that we will become a fan of this project.
I'm a fan of everything except that.
Well, I think you'll even be drawn into the fold on that.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
without knowing how that property owner, without discussion with them, it would be hard for me to know how they would like us to make a decision.
Just as a point, though, you're not making a decision on their property, but.
Well, we
what
are if we're putting a right-of-way that's going to eventually
Drive
go right
through.
through it.
You're actually being asked to require a dedication on the developer's property at this particular point of time. Whether that's used or not used will be determined in the future, but at this point, we're looking to get that dedication from the developer. We're not asking you to
So
dedicate.
this is a
land on somebody
dedication,
else's
this isn't
property.
like eminent domain where we are, if we approve this, we
Absolutely
have the
not.
right to go bulldoze their building.
Absolutely
There would
not.
have to be,
They can't dedicate land that they
Right.
don't own.
okay.
I still think it sends the wrong message.
Mr. Henry?
I'm fine.
Oh, okay. Anyone else? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is the applicant here?
Hi, I'm Ryan Dugdale with Wilson Associates, representing iSight LLC. I really don't have anything to add, but I would like to point out some of the thoughts I have. What we're showing right now is a possible access or alignment for the new intersection, and what that new condition number 13 is saying that if, through the city's plan review with Trans Systems, their negotiations and their findings in that traffic study, that if the alignment is there, that we would be willing to dedicate that right away so that intersection could go there. If it does go somewhere else, obviously, that's nothing that we can personally.
Mr. Odell, could I ask you to speak into the
Oh,
microphones?
sure,
Thank you very
sure, sorry about
much.
that.
Did everyone get that?
Did that help clear that up a little bit?
Well, I understand what you're saying, but that's not what the condition says. The condition says the right-of-way is dedicated.
The right-of-way.
Shall dedicate the right-of-way, not put a possible, we may do it in the future. It shall dedicate the right-of-way.
But that
Says the landowner.
But that says the that.
You're part of the right-of-way.
we are-
No, I know you're not dedicating the right-of-way where the business is.
Right, we
but-
are dedicating that land. We are willing to dedicate that land if the studies and the design shows that that alignment should be aligned on our property.
Mr. DeGreat, if you would come up so that everyone at home also can hear what you have to say.
on.
If the alignment associated with that right-of-way is not used, it'll be dedicated back to the property owner. This is so that we aren't in a position to build our project, and we're held hostage because we don't have the necessary rights of way.
Well, I'm just thinking that you may be holding the business owner hostage by putting the right-of-way in there first.
Well, it's just his
No,
land.
no, not their property.
Well, but having that street dead end against the back of their building,
No, we don't want it to dead end, we want to.
well, it will unless you get that property.
All right, excuse me. Mr. McDonald?
Well, we're not going to build a road that dead ends in the front and back of a building, so if we don't acquire the property necessary to put the road in there, if that's where it's decided it's best to be, from the owner by negotiations, we probably won't put it in. And the property that, even if they did dedicate it, it wouldn't be used for public use, so it wouldn't even come to the city really. It would just go back to whoever owned it in the first place. Yes, Mr. DeGray.
Again, I think the stipulation
Thank you,
is
Mr. DeGreat.
there to make sure that if the alignment is on our property, that we'd be willing to dedicate that right away. It has nothing to do with anybody else's property at this time.
Okay. All right, anybody, Mr. Adele,
Well,
did you have some
I do
additional?
have a couple other things. Just to make a clarification, the traffic study was submitted and approved. There was one noted change to it that there's a designation drive 6 will not be allowed. And I can show you kind of where that's at. This was drive 3. There was a proposed another drive for this lot 2, track 1 down here, and that will not be allowed per letter written by Cesar Yanez. So, but to that point, we can always resubmit the plan with that modification when we submit for design review. So it doesn't need to be stricken or anything. I just want to make that notification or that correction. And then the last thing I'd like to request are items are 5 and 10. We'd like these to be only applicable to the developers' public project improvements, as that term is defined in the TIF agreement.
Say that again, please.
We'd like those items 5 and 10 applicable to the developer public project improvements, as that term is defined in the TIF agreement. And I thought Oliver, Scott, I thought there was some talks with this afternoon with that. Is that correct?
Mr. Allen, could you clarify?
I don't recall not to that specific
Okay.
issue, but I think it was implied in
Okay.
these that it would apply only to the developer's responsibilities.
And the request is just that gets added and
Sure.
amended to the stipulations. And I think, yeah, it was kind of understood, but they just wanted it. And then the new one, 13, which I don't know if you guys have. Okay. Is dedicated prior to, just that is dedicated by prior to the final approval by agreement, not inconsistent with the TIF agreement. So we want it to be taken back to the TIF agreement, which again, I think is the same point we made about 5 and 10, that it was understood, just that it needs to be clearly defined.
Well, it does reference the TIF agreement.
Yes, it does.
Oh, it does. I didn't get a copy of it, so.
Yeah, 10 does also.
Blind a little. Okay, great. I guess that's all I had. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to help you
Have
out.
any questions for Mr. Odell? Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to bring it up here for discussion.
I would like to see item 13 deleted personally myself, until such time that it's relevant.
Well, or we can hear from that property owner that it is going to affect, even though it's not on his property because it's adjacent to it.
But this has nothing to
Nothing
do,
to do with the property right now.
Person that owns the property.
this is strictly the people who currently own the property now. This has nothing to do with any other properties.
Well, it doesn't directly have anything to do with the other property, but if I had a right-of-way dedicated ending on, against my property, I would feel pressured by the city to dispose of that property, and it might affect my property value.
Would be
No.
probably a person that said, hey, if you want it, you're gonna have to pay more money. All right, so, I mean, it works both ways. You know, if they know the city needs the property, if I owned it, I would probably say, okay, you can have it. But you have to pay for it.
And then it ends up in an eminent domain or a
Actually,
condemnation situation.
the city staff's thinking ahead on this. They're
And
acquiring
I
all the
applaud them.
easements,
I
so we
applaud
have
them
it
for that. I
in the
just- I just
future. I think
wish
it's
they
a
would-
well-thought-out idea.
Think ahead around that.
Well, they mentioned that they're already in negotiation and they're not allowed to speak of what they're presently discussing. We need to probably let our city planners do their job, along with the engineer, to make this happen. I mean, we're still trying to get this development through. We need to do it.
I agree.
For some reason, they
I'm-
were saying that it's necessary and they're discussing it. So, you know, the property owner that is not here,
Even if he were here, he wouldn't be allowed to speak because it's not a public hearing.
we do have a property owner here. Okay, and that's all we're referring to in this, you know, as far as this proposal. And, you know, we're trying to foresee something that has been planned and thought out. I think we need to let the progress take its course. And I'd like to make a motion that we approve with all 13, case file PP 6-09-2210.
Second.
If I may, on the, that's with all 13 of
All
the...
13.
And do we need to include any wording on number 5 referencing the TIF?
The TIF.
10 and 13 already have it. Mr. McDonald?
The city agrees that it's as required by the TIF agreement as to 5, 10, and 13.
Great, thank you very much. All right, I have a motion and a second for Mr. Parker. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Franklin?
Aye.
Haney?
No.
Parker?
Aye.
Henning?
Aye.
Banks?
No.
Phillips?
No.
May?
Aye.
Trozen?
Aye.
Culpepper?
Aye. Motion carries. All right. That brings us to item number 4, the master alternative sign plan for Kings Ridge Shopping Center. Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the commission. Moving across the street, Woods Chapel to Kings Ridge Shopping Center. The applicant is applying for a master and alternative sign plan. The proposed renaming of the center is to be Woods Chapel Plaza, which is what you see referenced in the staff report. The property sits on approximately 9.3 acres. And the building does, sits on approximately 9.3 acres, as shown on the site map there. As I'm sure you well know, this is an older existing shopping center, and the applicant owner is looking to replace and improve the aging facade of the shopping center with a new and updated look. You can get a glimpse of that from the attached renderings in your attached to your staff report. However, because no additional building area is being constructed, the site plan design review approval is not required for this, so you will not be seeing those facade improvements before you, but they are proceeding through a building permit process as we speak with those improvements. However, the quantity of new signs being proposed does require the master or alternative sign plan approval, which is what's before you this evening. The applicants are currently proposing wall signage for each tenant space on the west facade, wall signage on the south facade for the end unit tenant, and one monument sign along Woods Chapel Road. Staff does recommend approval of the project with 5 conditions, which I'll highlight here shortly. The applicant is requesting up to 16 wall signs and 1 freestanding sign. Again, there's possibility of having up to 24 tenants in the shopping center, although given the current configuration, only 15 tenants are currently proposed. The 16th wall sign would be that southern facing wall sign, so 15 west facing, 1 south facing, plus the monument sign. With that, I do want to note that the monument sign, the exact location of that has not been formally identified due to what we had just been discussing with the previous agenda item, proposed modifications and realignment of Woods Chapel Road. So staff had been discussing with the owner and the applicant that they should consider just resubmitting as an amended sign plan later on once that final location is determined, to come back before you with just that freestanding, that monument sign at that point. So staff is recommending that as a part of the 5 recommendations this evening. However, they did provide some specifics in terms of what they're proposing to construct with that freestanding sign, including some dimensions. So I'm sure they'd be happy to discuss that with you as well, even though staff is recommending that they come back with a revised or amended sign plan later on. Part of the reason being, again, just the fact that the exact location has not been identified, a landscaping plan has not been submitted, any setback requirements have not been reviewed as part of that final location, as well as the overall height is proposed to be just over 15 feet, which exceeds the code allowance of 12 feet. So again, for those outstanding issues, that's why staff is recommending that the freestanding sign be come before you in a separate amended sign plan. With that, there are some possibly overwhelming numbers thrown at you, beginning on page 4 of 7 of the staff report. But that's simply to specify all the potential proposed signage and to explain further staff's agreement with the applicant in their request to utilize the criteria of no more than 10% of the facade be their calculated maximum square footage of signage rather than the more restrictive signage allowed per linear feet of street frontage. As you can see in the map there, the street frontage along Woods Chapel is quite limited, essentially, based on the fact that the northeast corner there is the Quick Trip. Just north of there is auto repair service, and those are not a part of the property owner's property for the Kingsridge Shopping Center. So you can see that that's been quite minimized in terms of their actual frontage along Woods Chapel, which would only allow 504 square feet, including the monument sign, whereas they're requesting with their wall signage alone 724 square feet. So the 10% of the facade using that calculation would be just over 1,000 square feet, so they'd be well within the code limits using that that designation rather than the more restrictive street frontage designation. So with that, just show a representation of what they're proposing with the signage. You can see here too the renovated facade on the drawing there as they're proposing it, and just generally what the scale would look like for one of those proposed existing users. That was on the south end. This is on the north end. And again, I'm sure the applicant would be happy to walk through the more specifics with you. The wall signage collars have not been defined specifically, but they did provide a fairly detailed 8-point sign criteria memorandum here that identifies essentially their sign program to maintain consistency with all the different tenants within the shopping center. So they did provide that great detail here. All the signage is being proposed to be channel letters, all internally lit, and you can see there just generally what that style and format would look like. With that, again, staff does recommend approval with 5 conditions. 2 conditions I did want to highlight based on my comments up to this point. Number 3 does reference, again, that freestanding sign. Staff's recommending that not be approved as part of this application. Then amended sign plan be brought before you again once all the details are identified with that freestanding sign. And number 5, again, the wall signage for each tenant shall not exceed the 10% of their tenant facade, using that calculation versus the more restrictive signage per linear foot of street frontage. So that's a reference, I should say, in both conditions 4 and 5. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Anyone have any questions for staff? Yes, Mr. Trozen.
If you could kind of provide some clarification. I'm not quite sure why they need signage on the south side when we have signage that's facing on the west side, the primary intersections of Kingsbridge as well as Woods Chapel Road, versus the south side is across from residential district, if I'm not mistaken.
That's a very good question, Commissioner Trozen. They are allowed that signage because it is facing an access and facing a street along Kingsbridge Drive there. So that is an allowable sign per the sign code, and it would just be the one for that end tenant. Again, I think they've requested that because I believe their intent is to have that end tenant be a larger tenant space and be more of a primary anchor, so to speak, of the entire shopping center. I guess I'd defer to them to maybe explain a little bit more their rationale for needing that sign on the south side. Again, it is allowed by the code, but certainly it's well within the Plan Commission's purview to consider any restrictions to that sign.
Any other questions for staff? All right, thank you
All right,
very much.
thank you.
Is the applicant here? Good evening.
I'm Samantha Hendricks. I work for Acme Sign, and I'm here to represent them on the signs for this location. Do you need an address?
No.
Okay. I didn't know if we needed to do that. And
Is there any information that you would like to add to what staff has already given us?
Just that we would like to allow the 10% per tenant of the facade there, just because of like you said, the square footage or the length of the street frontage would limit them so much. And already they're at, most of them we had scaled them out to about 18 inches or less for the channel letters. And you have to be careful with how small you go with those, just because it makes it hard to bend the letter to that small space and fit the lighting in there. So that was another concern that we had on just making sure we kept them at least 12 inches or larger in order to be able to do the lighting correctly for the signs. And also be able to be read from the street and not make it difficult to see them.
Mr. Trozen, would you like to
Sure.
address your
I
sign?
brought up to staff the reason for the proposed sign on the south side. And so I was just curious as far as what is the applicant's request other than it's allowed?
Well, and that it is an anchor tenant. So we did limit them to 200 square feet. They do occupy a rather large space on the end of the building there. And I probably ought to let the developer go ahead and answer that also.
From here, or would you like me to come
Up here, please.
We have viewers at home, and if you're back there, they can't hear through the
sure.
microphones.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Todd Blakely with Blakely Development Company, 1074 West Santa Fe in Olathe. Really, our goal for that tenant, again, it's been described to you as the anchor tenant. They occupy almost half of the shopping center. And being on the corner, it's important for them to have signage that in the northbound lane of Wiz Chapel Road, you can see their building, see their signage, and know what their use is, who they are.
Any other questions for the applicant?
I do.
Yes.
It does say that you're going to try to conform to the colors, but it does say that the letter style is not limited. I just wanted to make sure that with them all being illuminated and everything, that it's going to look pleasing, I guess, as far as a shopping center, because you've got total non-visibility already because the trucks are all there. You don't even know who's in the shopping mall.
Right.
So I just wondered if that's going to change because you're putting these nice signs in.
Well, I can probably address that. You're probably referring to two men in a truck? The
Well, I
tenant
didn't want
that's
to mention
there?
names, but
Okay, well, no, that's fine, and they're aware of the situation, too. They would like to park their trucks in back. When they did that, there was a tremendous amount of vandalism. Someone came through and literally destroyed 4 or 5 of their trucks. They think it was a competitor. They don't think it was random. For that reason, we've allowed them to park in front of the shopping center until we redo the lighting, which hopefully is going to take place next year. And we're going to find a more permanent place for them to park that it won't obstruct the view to the center. So we're very aware and very sensitive of that because we hear from our tenants on that as well.
because it'd be really nice to not have them there.
Well, it would be, yes. We sure hate to get rid of a good tenant, but yeah, we've worked with them, and we're going to find a better location for those trucks.
Move them behind one of the buildings.
Well, we'd like to try, yeah.
All right, very good. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bring it up here for discussion.
Well, Madam Chair, I was looking at the monument sign at 15 inches, 1.5 inches. It said code allows for 12. And right now, we don't know where it's going.
Right.
So we'll be voting on a sign, first of all, that's going to be approximately 3 feet above, plus we don't know where it's going.
No, we're not. Item number 3, recommendation number 3, is that we do not include that monument sign, that be brought forward once Woods Chapel is realigned and they know exactly where they want to put it, and we can address that at that time. Any other items to discuss? I would entertain a motion. Mr. Phillips?
I would, just a quick comment first. Thank you for redoing and staying with Blue Springs and trying to revitalize this center. We really look forward to that. Would you like to make it before I make a motion?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
And I just think that these tenants are so far off of the road from Woods Chapel Road. I think that they're at a disadvantage, and I think that this is a good sign plan for them and for the shopping center. And I respect Commissioner Trojan and his comments about the residential, but as well, I also see that they all just seem to be at a disadvantage. This shopping center, I don't know how old it is, but it has got to be 20, 30 years old, and it was just designed so that it's so far back. So I like to see these efforts being done to improve their business.
Which is exactly why
Yes.
the change was made,
It's at least 20 years.
Yeah.
at least.
I've been driving by it for at least 20.
All right.
All right.
Mr. Billis, did you want to make a motion?
I would like to make a motion, please. I would like to move for approval of Kings Ridge Shopping Center Master Alternative Sign Plan, ASP 6092200, with 5 staff recommendations.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. That brings us to the 2008 Planning Commission Annual Report. Going to remind us what we have done this
Yes.
year.
Madam Chair, I can come to the podium if you so choose. Otherwise, I would just open it up for any questions, comments, or concerns with the annual report. Hopefully everyone had ample opportunity to review that since it was distributed at the last meeting. And we wanted to move forward with actually publishing this, and both in print and online. So we're just looking for any last-minute comments or changes that you would have, and we'll move forward with, again, publishing that here rather quickly.
Our proofreaders have been through it.
I went through it, but it's been a while, so I would like to say that I think that you're getting better and better at this. It's looking better with more color and more illustrations and everything else, and I really appreciate that.
I will pass that along to the primary author, Lisa Atkinson, because she's one who put that together, and appreciate that. She looked at a new format and clip art, just simple things like that to try to kind of spice it up, I guess, a little bit and make it a little bit more easy to read, considering it is only 35 pages, but it's still 35 pages. So.
I think it's really nice that I can go back and see what case number and when we approved it, and, you know,
it is. It's a good reference. Yes.
and what all was done. It's great.
All right. Well, it looks like you're good to go to press.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I'll pass it on to Lisa, and I'm sure she'll be eager to get that bound and out to everybody here shortly.
Very good. Anything else that we need to discuss this evening? I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Well,
Thank you.
we had the right size.